Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Open Teams community event. I'm Brian Skin, the Open Source Architect Community Manager here at Open Teams, and I'll be your host for today. Open Teams is the single point of contact, procurement, and accountability for a network of experts and complementary services ensuring your success with open source. Visit openteams.com or reach out to us at connect@openteams.com to learn more. As part of Open Teams' overall mission to sustain and support open source, we are also sponsoring the Open Source Architect community with the goal of providing a dedicated space for experts to connect and collaborate over their favorite open source technologies. To learn more or to apply for membership, visit openteams.com/OSA-community. We're also sponsoring the Engineering Manager community on LinkedIn, focused on fostering the career and personal development of engineering leaders. Visit openteams.com/EMC-LinkedIn to check that out. Today, I'll be talking with Casey Dye, founder of Expanded Skills. Casey is a tech leadership coach and former head of engineering at Manulife and Capgemini. He's on a mission to help senior engineers and junior engineering managers walk a successful path of career growth into tech leadership. This transition from a contributor role and even a senior contributor role to a managerial role is fundamentally different in kind from promotions from one contributor level to the next, and it can be extremely tricky to navigate well. In today's conversation, Casey's going to share some of his knowledge and wisdom about doing this successfully. Thanks to everyone in the audience for being here. Please drop any questions you might have into the chat. We'll answer them as best we can. We are recording today's event, and that video will be posted on the Open Teams YouTube channel once it is ready. Subscribe there to be notified when it goes live. Okay, let's get started. Casey, hello and welcome. Thanks for your time today.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Delighted to talk to you. So before we get into the this contributor manager transition topic, tell us a bit more about yourself, your background, where you're at now.
Yeah. So I've walked quite an unconventional career path, so to speak. Played around in multiple disciplines. So I started in the finance space out of business school. Went to Procter & Gamble, helped work on a large portfolio straight out of school of skin and personal care products, working with the largest retailers here in Canada. Then I made a pivot into data science because a lot of the problems I encountered in my first role were ripe for data science, such as campaign measurement, forecasting, things that had a predictive nature to it that could be modeled and the decision could be reproduced. Mm-hmm. So that was my entry point into tech through data science. And I went to work at Accenture for a couple of years within their AI and data science practice, got a balance of exposure to client work. And in the back half of my time there, I spent a bit of time in their innovation hub as their data science resident SME. So I was the first data scientist upon the launch of the innovation hub. Then moved into management at Manulife, which I pivoted more towards the data engineering space, since a lot of the problems in data science, especially when a lot of models are getting stuck in the sandbox and can't make it to production, traced upstream to data engineering. So that was the entry point into both management and data engineering at Manulife, which over a course of 2.5 years, I scaled the team from 5 to 30 people and also shipped more than 10 models into production when they didn't have a robust process to begin with when I arrived. Then moved back to consulting in a senior leadership role, leading a practice in Canada with 80 to 100 people in the talent pool, covering financial services nationwide. Now moving out of that space and focusing full-time on talent development now.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, and that's where Expanded Skills comes in, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So do you want to talk a bit about Expanded Skills now, or should we get into the topic first?
I think you introduced it quite well, the overall mission. So we're helping people who are looking for more career growth, maybe feeling a bit stuck, or new EMs who are feeling a bit overwhelmed because the nature of the role changed. They're wanting to contribute more, but they realize their efforts don't really scale, which actually transitions well into the topic today.
Indeed. Yeah, I was going to say, the two kind of personas or archetypes that we talked about in preparing for this conversation are right there. Why don't you go ahead and jump right in?
Yeah. So after doing a bit of research and compiling my experience over the past 10 years, I've noticed that a lot of people get stuck around, in the industry term is called terminal level. So you basically capped out in terms of how you can grow your career, whether it's from a corporate career model standpoint, or it's looking to like scale your impact and influence across the org, or growing technically even around the senior engineer level. So that's usually around 1 or 2 or maybe 3 promotions in, depending on how the corporate structure goes, where they're at a pivotal point that they feel the need that they need to start managing people, which we can talk about. That's not the only path, but it's one of many paths.
Mhm.
And once they enter that, there's a fundamental shift in the rules of the game. So the strategy to navigate being an IC effectively up to this point no longer is optimal, because what you're asked to do and what you're expected has fundamentally changed.
Mhm. Mhm. And so, yeah, again, so expanded skills and what you're trying to do there is focusing kind of just before, yeah, individuals who are just before and just after that leap across this the terminal level.
That's where definitely most of the pain happens.
Mhm.
But we try to design it grounded in principles that are timeless and not based on changes in trends. So it's robust across time. So it's really designing a toolkit for someone to progress all the way from a senior IC and even up to the CTO level eventually.
Mhm.
So yeah, we just found the most pain happens in that first transition, but there's usually a couple more transitions, especially when you move into a manager of managers role and moving into the C-suite after that, where you're accountable for everything within your function. Yeah.
Mhm. Indeed, indeed. So I believe the focus here that we want to focus the conversation on is that first transition.
Yep. The first
So,
transition.
you know, what are some of the changes? You know,
Yeah.
the things that catch people off guard as they contemplate that move.
Yeah. So when you're moving from a new grad role all the way up until you hit that terminal level, your individual throughput matters a ton, right? So upskilling on your technical skills, your ability to land quality code in production, how much you can produce, how high quality and how consistently. As long as like you're optimizing on those 3 things and making sure like you're getting your work done and fitting into a pre-existing workflow, usually, if you're at a more established company, and being able to gel well within it and contribute, then doing more of that better will get you up to that level.
Mhm.
However, the transition when you move into managing a team, or when you're asked to scale your input through influence without authority, if you don't have directs, is you're expected to optimize the throughput of other people more than
Mhm.
yourself. So you're
Mhm.
measured on the overall impact of your team. So you can imagine that there's a couple of ways you can do that, right? Like one is you just work harder, which is not sustainable because the level of expectations is you're meant to 2x, 3x, or even 10x your impact. Right?
Mhm. Right.
Yeah. So some low-hanging fruit I usually point people to is focus on, let's say, alignment first. If you're pointing 10 team members all working in the same direction, uh, that's way more productive than trying to pull the rock yourself, push the rock
Mhm.
yourself up the mountain. And when they're, especially when they're not aligned, they're counteracting forces actually. So you may actually end up where you started, or even worse, head faster in a wrong direction. So that's
Mhm.
where alignment comes in. But that's not something you typically think about when you're progressing from junior to senior engineer. Yeah.
Right. Right. Okay. So, what is it? What does it feel like? Can you give, maybe if this is a good question, what does it feel like to be in that leadership spot where, you are experiencing that, yeah, the team where you have a team and they're pulling different directions? Is it mainly just an experience of frustration? Is there confusion? How do you identify you're in that spot? And then how do you get yourself out of it?
Usually a good indicator is you're feeling a loss of control at the beginning,
Mm.
because at first you're just like, I need to do better, I need to get X skill, I need to work faster, harder, more reliably, and that would solve 80 to 90% of my problems in the past. But now it's more about thinking, how did I work efficiently, and how do I pass that knowledge or expertise onto other people, or how do I even better like fix the workflow so that other people working within that workflow can produce more efficiently.
Mhm.
Um, Even like I think a good model is, rather than trying to add more for more, is to solve by subtracting first. So it would force you to zoom out and think about, if I were to get the same results but with less effort and less time and less resources, what can I
Mhm.
do at a team level to make those changes?
Kind
So
of
that,
identifying.
yeah, you would identify process inefficiencies, or if you have a quality problem of pushing bad code into production, you would zoom out one layer and you immediately realize that the checks you do before you're allowed to deploy has some gaps in there. So
Mhm.
rather than trying to blame a particular engineer for doing better, you fix it at a system level. So it's
Mhm.
more error prone, not foolproof and less error prone.
Interesting. How, I guess one of the things, we've, in my day to day, we're definitely seeing some things where there's some, trying to make sure everyone's aligned, everyone's on the same,
Mhm.
aligned on the same page, everyone has all the most recent information. Struggles with tooling. So I mean, there's a whole lot of, you've got your Jiras, you've got your GitHubs and your GitLabs and any number of management tools. Um, how is it, are there how for development work in particular, how do you, in general, do you find that the tooling that's available is
Mhm.
usually there and you just have to use it well, or do you find that there are struggles that this tool is close but it doesn't quite do what we need and that's contributing to the problem?
Mm. I'll cover this twofold. So first is at the principles level, going back to thinking at a more macro level, at a system level, and how tooling plays. And then I have a particular take on tooling I
Okay.
want to share. So the first, it goes back to the same principle where your ability to think in systems at a macro level is way more important. So
Hmm.
naturally, you'll end up trying to look for efficiencies and optimization in your processes and tooling because those have multiple touch points. So every time a developer fires up their laptop, they're working inside a process and they're using a set of tools.
Hmm.
So any improvement made to the process or tooling scales basically with each time that it's interacted with for each team member. So that's
Hmm.
like the systems thinking. So naturally, you'll be thinking about your tech stack and your tools and any inefficiencies there will be definitely a force multiplier in either a positive or negative direction,
Hmm.
depending
Yeah.
on the choices you make there. For tooling specifically, it gets very tricky because the more tools you have, there's a trade-off between flexibility, but there's also sprawl. So for each capability layer within your architecture stack, if you have more than one tool, then there's definitely going to be some sprawl.
Hmm.
Once then the code surface area grows and the number of integrations you have to keep track of grows as well. So there's
Hmm.
multiple points of failure. So you're trading that off for more developer flexibility, or you have like a superset of features that if a particular tool doesn't have in the first one, then the features in tool two can like compensate for that, right?
Hmm.
So it's a very nuanced question. One framework or mental model I like to anchor on is innovation tokens. So for each capability within your stack, I'd like to limit it usually to 3 tools as a forcing function to balance both the tried and true what works to deliver results reliably versus experimentation. So
Hmm.
these 3 innovation tokens, I would divide them up with there's one standard tool that you use as a default. And then there's usually one legacy tool or database or platform that you're using that you're trying to migrate off of into the default option.
Hmm.
And then that would leave one innovation token for experimentation. So that's a forcing function for them to use the innovation token. But usually the constraint works more effectively the other way because as engineers, we like to experiment more widely. So
Hmm.
they would want more than one token. The problem with experimenting with more than one tool when you already have two, one that's legacy and one's default, is you
Hmm.
leave a lot of work in progress experiments. So if you have a forcing function that you're only allowed to have one experiment running at a time, you could choose to kill it and substitute another experiment. It prevents like the sprawl quite a bit.
That
But
makes
it
sense.
also adds an incentive for people to migrate off of the legacy tool faster, because that's another way to free up another token.
Mm. Okay. Okay. And that's actually an explicit policy, so to speak, that's monitored. And it's
Yeah.
like these are where these are allocated, and in order to add something new, something's got to give.
That's the third dimension to system thinking, actually, because we talk about process, talk about tools, and the third is incentives, which is largely grounded in metrics, rewards, and policy.
Mhm. The
Yeah.
human factor, in
Yes.
large degree. Yeah, interesting. Okay, terrific. Thank you for that. I'm going to be I'll be thinking about that because it very likely could be helpful for us directly. Um, so I think one of the next topics that we discussed diving into is more detail about the skills involved and how the skills differ between a contributor role and a manager role. So, you know, what are those differences? I mean, I guess, for example, what sorts of skill needs or skill gaps tend to catch folks off guard as they start addressing a managerial responsibility?
Yep. So the first one we somewhat touched on, which is your ability to think at a more macro level, but really systems thinking.
Hmm.
So if we cross over to the systems thinking discipline, a lot of the foundational ideas there, you could even like just borrow them and apply them to your own workflow. So thinking about things as like stocks, flows, interactions. So you focus more on the connections between the pieces and the rate of change rather than the pieces themselves. So a couple of the examples earlier was rather than thinking about how do I optimize this tool in particular, think about how many people are using this tool and then like what outputs are generated from the tool. So you're more thinking about like what's the upstream effects and downstream effects rather than the component pieces. Same with managing a team. Rather than focusing on one particular individual, focusing on the system that he or she works in, and starting your optimization there, and it'll naturally trickle down there. So being able to zoom out, think in systems is critical, which is the foundational skill you need to identify opportunities that allows yourself to scale your impact. So if you're able to think in systems, then naturally you'll be able to find bottlenecks very easily. And by fixing a bottleneck, it'll naturally scale itself because of those factors, multiple touch points, et cetera, right?
Hmm.
Downstream and upstream effects. Then the next one is around decision making, because after identifying those opportunities that you could pursue, there's always a level of risk involved, especially as you make higher and higher level decisions.
Hmm.
So the one underlying thread that's true from when you first move into management and all the way up to CTO levels and beyond is you're asked to deal with problems that have increased ambiguity, but you're asked to provide more clarity on a longer term time horizon.
Hmm.
So those three levers just basically amplify the more senior you get, which is usually a good gauge of how senior you are in the org. So how
Right.
ambiguous are the problems? How much clarity are you asked to provide? So it's like you're always asked to provide vision, strategy, plan on a page, right?
Yeah.
And how far out do you need to extrapolate? So your ability to think in probabilistic terms has a significant value the higher up you go, because
Mhm.
there's more and more uncertainty and people are relying on you to add more certainty into the process.
Understood. And so it's the is there really just the part of what you're having to gauge is prospects for beneficial outcomes and
Yeah.
prospects for negative outcomes, the benefit, the risk benefit analysis
Yeah.
under that uncertainty.
Yeah, the toolkit's very, very wide, especially if we go into the tactical level. For example, one of the things is how do you run an effective one-to-one? How do you
Hmm.
like evaluate people at year-end performance review? But those are like very tactical things, and there's like 100 things, right? So if I were to only cover like the foundational toolkit and it's limited to 2 or 3 things, it's your ability to find opportunities when you see it. So it's identifying the attributes of what is a high impact opportunity, which is
Hmm.
grounded in systems thinking. And then it's making a decision making good decision when you have incomplete information after you spotted the opportunity. So those are like the 1-2 punch. And the third one is how do you stay competitive and keep your skills fresh in the long term? So that goes back to how do you upskill yourself and then how do you upskill other people?
Hmm.
Yeah.
So, I mean, those three things absolutely make sense. Do you want to dive into like how do you gain is it something how do you
Yeah.
learn to do
Yeah. I
those?
can.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll give an example on the first thing, which is thinking in systems and finding opportunities, interventions you can make that has an outsized impact. So when I was at Manulife and I inherited the engineering team, we went from 6 and then back down to 4. And then eventually I had to scale it to 30 across 2 years. So hiring was a huge deal, right? So I noticed that the hiring wasn't happening fast enough in relation to the workload that was coming in. So if we take a systems thinking lens to it, you have a two-stock system. You have your talent pool and you have your workload, right? And there's interactions between that. And there's inflow in terms of your recruiting efforts into the talent pool. And then there's outflow with churn and retention and everything, right? So if we start zooming out, thinking about these two stocks, and you need the talent to go address the workload, I'm going to leave the workload alone because that's going to get into like another complicated system. But basically, let's simplify to say you need X talent to address like Y workload, right? Basically.
Yeah.
So I looked at it. It's there's a shortfall, basically. So I looked at, okay, how many quality candidates are coming in on a weekly, bi-weekly basis? How many of them make it through our recruiting process and get hired? How many are rejected at the interview process? How many are rejected at the CV stage? So it's like really breaking it down. And we found we had basically a lead generation problem, right, with in-house efforts. So if you're not thinking on a macro level, you would probably just have a pretty confrontational meeting with HR to say you need to get me more quality CVs, right? But that's basically not going to fix anything, and it's going to lead to an escalation cycle, which doesn't end well for either party. So instead, what I did was I looked for the most difficult hires, usually closer to the senior level, where I need them to play a tech lead and lead a project. And I negotiated with my manager and my management to say, okay, let's generate more quality candidates. And these are the toughest hires. Here are the numbers for how long it's taking to hire. So can we go do external sourcing options specifically for those hires? So the in-house recruiters and HR can focus on the standard hires, which we have a more robust process. So we did that, and then they had more control over that interview process. So we implemented some pre-screening questions that the recruiter needed to like walk the candidate through, had them submit a 5 to 10 minute clip as part of the process. So it's way more holistic than jamming everything into a one-page CV, which is very, very unnatural, honestly, especially for experienced candidates to get a gauge of what they do. So I had more control over that. Then we fixed the lead gen problem. Then once there's enough quality candidates coming in, I noticed another bottleneck pop up, which was an interviewing capacity problem. I noticed I was taking on more than 50% of the interviews myself. And a lot of my team, I was still training to interview properly and assess candidates, and they weren't sure like how to gauge. So I felt like a lot of round 2 candidates that came to me after my team interviewed them, there's still a lot of no-goes there. And there's a lot of alignment and debriefing after. So what I did was I picked up round 1 myself and had my team shadow me for those rounds. So I'm building more capacity to solve the interviewing capacity problem. So what we do is they shadow, and then I make sure to take 15 to 20 minutes after the call to debrief together to say, walk them through my thought process, why I made the decisions I made during the call, and why I asked the questions I asked, and how I came to my evaluation. So after a couple of those reps, we managed to eventually fix the interviewing capacity problem. So that's like one very grounded, tangible example on how systems play. Yeah,
the knowledge transfer. I mean, it's an educational training process in order to upskill the people in the ways that were necessary to fulfill that role efficiently and effectively.
Yeah, the capacity expansion problem. Yeah.
Yeah. So that as well then is how do you find the right I guess in your case you had the knowledge and so you could convey it. Are there what happens if there's a situation where you recognize a need? Is it often effective if you find the right vendor or contractor to train those skills using an external source?
I think it first there's a step before that, which is realizing that what are the attributes that signal you have like a bigger problem at hand? So you would start looking into like how to find the bottleneck. So what we do at Expanded Skills actually train people first to identify when there is a bottleneck in the first place, so you know to look for one. Or if one comes up, then you can recognize one when you see one. Right. So in this case, it's like figuring out where it's getting stuck in the process, and then just like tackling that. But you can like train that actually, because I solved one of these problems basically in a span of a year or 2 years, right? So the question for new EMs or seniors looking to make EM is, how do I get reps on this so I can practice, right? One thing is always zoom out at least 1 to 2 layers from your day-to-day work. So that pattern interrupt will force them to think at a more macro level. Instead of how do I land more code in production, it's zooming out. It's like, how can I make a group of 10 people land more code in production? Yeah, and then you zoom
the
out
system.
another layer after that is, are there multiple SDLCs going on in the company? And are they divergent processes? Are they the same code review standards? Right?
Hmm.
Is it the same incident response once it lands in production? What
Hmm.
happens when you have a sub one? So that zooming out one layer and two layers is the pattern break usually, for new people starting out. The other one is a forcing function to, you're not allowed to use engineering or more code to solve the problem. So it forces you to think, when can I not use engineering to solve the problem? So
Hmm.
then they, instead of thinking about, let me push more code, more features to solve this, they'll think, okay, maybe I just need to fix that cross-functional relationship instead. Or
Hmm.
they think about, oh, people are measured the wrong way. So the incentives and the policies are incentivizing the wrong behaviors. So I go fix that metric or that policy. So
Hmm.
when you're taking your main tool away, you're forced to develop other things in your arsenal. So those are,
Indeed.
yeah, usually the two pattern breaks I show my clients to get them
Gotcha.
to think, yeah.
Okay. Um, so I guess what other skills, yeah, since you're talking, since we're talking about increasing skills, maybe we summarize if there are beyond what we've talked about already, to hit all the bases. What
Mhm.
are kind of a summary of all those skills that don't naturally develop as part of an individual contributor
Mm.
role that are going to be important in the managerial role?
Those are the two keystone ones that
Okay.
has worked over and over. But the third one is, we talked about staying competitive
Yeah.
and learning strategies and up to date. So when you first enter, it's looking for good role models and reference points. It's not even a bad idea to take a naive strategy at the beginning and just look for the best engineering leader that you know, that's ideally you have access to. Either they work at your workplace, that's ideal, or they're a mentor that you know them, or a professional coach, or someone who is well published online,
Hmm.
that like dumps his or her thoughts out in written or video form, and just look at how they think, what problems they work on, and first just try to replicate. It's only through the replication that you get to find your own style. So
Mm.
I always like look for who is the best role model for X problem, and then I just try to follow their path. And then I'll figure out what works for me and not, through that. But you have to kind of know what good looks like, and
Hmm.
then have a process to validate by doing. Then you'll be able to have your own style and hopefully pass it forward to other people as well.
Right,
Right?
right, right, right.
Publish their
Yeah,
thoughts.
that makes sense. And I guess a question that comes to mind there is: are there situations where a given person is in a contributor role at a given company, and they're looking to try to make this transition? They do the legwork to to take this information in and learn from it, and start to get a sense of their leadership style. What happens if they try to make a transition to a leadership role in that company and discover that their style it does isn't actually compatible with the other leadership in that company? Is that sometimes a problem? How do you, if so, how do you recognize that that's happening? And is that time to search elsewhere? Like talk a bit about that kind of
Yeah, yeah.
situation.
So this happens quite a bit, partly due to the Peter principle, where
Uh,
you get people promoted. But that aside, so the ideal is, that doesn't happen because you're expected to work at the next level or solve the next level's problems for a sustained period of time before like you make it up to that level. So it's better for the company, better for the individual as well. So they're already kind of operating at that level and they've proven they can solve problems at that level. Then they get
mm,
elevated to that level, which is
okay.
usually a very, like, it's on the conservative side, definitely, for like promotion processes. And not everybody agrees with that, but it's usually they need to try their hand at a new type of problem, especially when there's a sharp transition going from IC to manager, because you're solving
Hmm.
different kinds of problems, not harder variants of the same problem.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, so once they're in that role, there's usually different archetypes, especially when, let's say, you go from senior engineer to staff engineer, or one of those typical points like IC3 to like EM1, right? Which is the
Hmm.
point we're talking about. There's usually archetypes that a lot of leadership literature talks about. So there's people who are very good tech leads. So they're good at the project level. They can like drive a project from beginning to end, while still being hands-on 50% of the time. There's people who are very good architects who has a huge impact on the initial phases of the project specifically, where they handle a lot of the design decisions that has a lot of downstream effects. Or they're very good at like tooling evaluation, right? So that tech tooling choice, how do you like align your tech stack or standardize components that don't make sense? There's that archetype. There's a more rare archetype, which is a fixer. So they're kind of like an IC that is actually close to 5x, 10x. They can tackle the most problematic issues. I met a couple of very strong fixer types that usually work on ops teams, actually. So when you have a Sev 1, it goes to the fixer.
Get this working again as quickly as possible.
Rare. Yeah, or
Yeah.
it's like people have gone through the gauntlet and like 3 people have failed to solve this really hard technical problem. Then they send a fixer in. For that, yeah. Then there's like the archetype I align with most, which is you're able to scale your leader's impact, basically the direction they want to push the team and everything. So they can't be at everywhere at once, but essentially you're an extension of their vision. And you're able to like trickle that down so it's implemented and actualized all the way down to the task level, from the vision level to the task level. So there's many game plans, definitely. And I think hopefully most orgs are flexible in this regard, that if you're able to contribute on any of those dimensions, that they see value in that, and you wouldn't have to switch companies just to double down on your strengths. And they'll be able to like adjust you, right? Yeah, point you to problems that you're good at solving.
It's a mutual development process. You're learning about yourself, and they are learning about you. And as that as that learning progresses, there's a better fit over here. So let's shift, to make the best use of the skill set.
Yeah, if you're trying to put a fixer person into like more of a visionary type of role, that's not productive, but it's actually very, very expensive and hard to find a really good fixer. So there's no reason to punish that person. It's just about where do you put them in the workflow. So yeah, they're happy and you're happy. Yeah,
it's important that the upper management recognize those archetypes, those different leadership types, and be prepared to work with them effectively, and not to discount a particular kind of expertise because they're not familiar with it, or don't see how it helps.
Yeah, it's less when you first transition from like the IC to like mid-level management.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it's like a harder conversation definitely when you reach the manager of managers and up to the C-level, where especially if the phase of the company you're going through changes, like you're going from a startup to a scale up, then you may need like some leadership changes actually, because the person who got you from startup to the scale up, let's say they're like a very builder archetype, and usually founders, like 0 to 1 founders, are usually a builder archetype. When you need to scale, you need like a stronger operator. So then, whoever's like at the helm needs to like some hard decisions needed, right, at that stage. But it's still reallocating people to like fit the work that the company needs.
Right. Yeah, I'm reminded there was an event we did, I think it was January, it was earlier this year, with Oshri Cohen. We're talking about his experience as a fractional CTO, and how the different stages of startups as they grow have very significantly different needs, at least at those different stages. So it totally makes sense. Another thing we talked about in prep is the relationships and the people aspects of the leading, of being a leader. So talk a bit about that.
I'll kind of answer it in a 2-parter again. So first is like the common traps that people fall into when they're asked to extend their influence, especially cross-functionally outside of engineering. The trap first is, I think it's something to do with their communication, especially like their verbal communication. And then they'll focus on, how do I like say my thoughts like more concisely, which is important as a tactical fix. But I think what's more important is, do you understand how to play both sides of the board? So if you're talking to product, if you spend 10 hours fixing how you articulate your engineering related thoughts versus those 10 hours learning more about how the product manager operates, the latter is going to be way more effective than the former. if you only have 10 hours to spare, right? So that's the trade-off. It's usually understanding how the other person operates,
Hmm.
which is going from 0 to 1 in terms of like your expertise on that. If you're talking to marketing and you haven't worked in marketing before, then it's like getting that 0 to 1 in
Hmm.
marketing is just going to improve your ability to interact and communicate with that person rather than trying to articulate your engineering thoughts better.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah,
You're probably good, yeah, on engineering thoughts and coming up the right engineering plans,
yeah.
but it's like nascent in terms of like all the cross-functional groups you need to interact with. So I always push people to be more multidisciplinary because the time you spend outside of engineering has a much higher ROI after you cross that chasm from IC to manager.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, is that time do you recommend that that time be spent just mainly just talking to folks in those different roles, or is it?
I think before people start talking, there because it's going from 0 to 1, there's actually quite a bit of just baseline theory to learn, right?
Okay.
So you have like a kind of a foundational mental map of how product works, how like even infrastructure teams work, right? Because sometimes they're just at the software level, they don't deal with like admins and all that, or like just how marketing works, just like basic terminology. Like
Hmm.
get up to speed on that first.
Yeah.
So yeah, the conversations there's less friction, and then you go check your understanding with people who are like further ahead of you in that discipline.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so it's like a iterative process between theory and validating your theory in practice, and then going back and learning more theory.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. I mean, so for me personally, my background's chemical engineering. Actually, it's outside of tech. And then,
mhm.
a year and a half ago, when I joined Open Teams, I'm in a technical marketing role now, and I experienced exactly that. I'd be, in the conversation, I'd have to apologize, but like, okay, I'm sorry, I need this acronym, that acronym spelled out, and please tell me more about this term because I sort of know what it means, but I don't think I know well enough what it means. Please help me understand. So, there was, I've experienced that cross functional learning myself. So.
Yeah, yeah. Like when I shifted from Manulife to Capgemini, I shifted from the work and demand coming to me to like a go-to-market role where I needed to generate demand and
Hmm.
sometimes like, meet demand where it is in the right way.
Right.
So it's actually less about like doubling down on my data engineering knowledge
Hmm.
and coming up with a better data engineering solution. It's more understand how does the B2B sales cycle work? What do buyers look for when they pick a vendor, right? So
Hmm.
those things had way more mileage than coming up with an incrementally better data engineering solution.
Hmm.
But it kind of reinforces itself too. Let's say you know what kind of data engineering problems people face and how that buying process works, then you're able to refine your solution better to go meet that demand or generate
Hmm.
that demand by anticipating problems that they're not thinking about. So
Hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of, I can never remember which one it is, either empathy, sympathy, or both, to be an
probably both.
effective marketer. Yeah,
Yeah.
to feel their pain and to
Yeah.
understand what they're trying to do, and not just, again, it's kind of there's a duality to it. Not just, it's no longer just building the thing um, to have a certain function, which is important, but it's also how do we communicate that our thing has this function and can meet this need that you don't know. I mean, there's so many layers of I don't know, is epistemology the right word? Like, knowing what they
Yeah.
don't know and how they
Yes.
think,
Yes.
and
It goes back to that mental model at the beginning. So it's more
mhm,
ambiguity, more clarity, and longer time horizons.
mhm,
So
indeed.
yeah, you're envisioning something that's not there yet, right? So you're telling about the outcome that if
Yeah.
it were to be built, this is what you will get and this is what you will see.
Hmm. Indeed.
Yeah.
So one of the things, amid all this effort to expand skill sets into new disciplines and everything, um, for those, I mean, so probably, some making the jump may want to depart, the hands-on technical, at least in large degree, but many won't. How do they stay, with this? There's more to keep track of. How do you, practically, how do you stay engaged, or at least engaged enough with the technical, while you're expanding in these leadership related directions?
Yeah. So there's a bit of a fork in the road that leads to two separate paths. One is you want to pursue technical leadership, but you do need to stay technical. So I'll break down that path first. And then the second path is you want to keep adding value through your hands-on work and building. Then
Mm-hmm.
I would actually recommend um, going more of a subcontracting, solo consulting route, where like as long as you have the ability to go find your own clients and go solve those problems and fix things for them hands-on, that's
Hmm.
usually like a good path to at least consider.
Hmm.
Rather than trying to like go up the management chain because of external forces, because people are like telling you this is the right thing to do, or this is the only way you can get a pay bump. So there's that like path two. So for path
Hmm.
one, there's a huge confusion in the industry between how technical you need to be as an EM and everything. So I think it's a confusion between how good you need to be with technical implementation versus how good your technical judgment needs to be. There's definitely overlap between the two, because to have good technical judgment, you sometimes need to go into the technical implementation and even do things yourself to make a
Hmm.
better judgment call. For example,
Right.
with the archetype. Yeah, it's like, oh, do I still need to touch code level as an architect? It's like, well, if it improves your technical judgment as like what you're trying to optimize overall, and
Hmm.
that's the best move to do that, then you absolutely do what's required to improve your technical judgment. But
But you have to know how deep to go there.
yeah, or if that is the actual best move or best
Right.
use of time. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
maybe it's like getting more clarity on design patterns, or it has nothing to do with architecture technicals. It's just how do you gate the requirements coming in. So yeah, it's like
Interesting.
looking at the board rather than just focusing on I need to code better to be a better architect. It's like, yes, there are situations where that applies, but just remember you're trying to optimize for technical judgment, not technical implementation.
Hmm. And
Yeah.
I will actually, take the opportunity to drop in the quick pitch. If anybody out there watching is interested in that path number two, trying to go the contractor consultant route, part of what Open Teams does is provide support for you in that in various ways. Back office, if you need a team, we can help you find that. So anybody considering going that way or actively going that way, please reach out to us, connect@openteams.com. We're here to help. So commercial over.
Yes. Very nice transition.
um, so what have we got? One of the thoughts that I had in thinking about the topic. Say we've got somebody who is, they're reaching the upper end of the individual contributor, ranks, and they see this, they're like, this might be the path forward to me. Um, what are some, I don't know, warning signs or indications that person could be looking out for, that they aren't ready to start trying to make that leap?
Mhm.
Any thoughts there?
Yeah. When the 90% of how you make an impact is dependent on yourself, like producing the output.
Hmm.
And when you're asked to scale that down to 70 or 50% and get results through other people, you have this churning feeling or like a lump in your throat, or it's I just don't know what plays I have at my disposal. Right. So that goes back to recognizing opportunities and how to look out for one. Right. So that's missing like a fundamental skill set.
Hmm.
There are plenty of things that can be optimized through like other people, through processes, through policy, through incentives. It's just having that training to recognize those are things you could do to move the needle.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
good, good. Um, so you mentioned, I'm going to be jumping around a bit, but kind of
Mhm.
picking some assorted notes. You mentioned force multiplier, and it's pretty clear, having more productivity, through a team rather than just increasing your own individual productivity.
Yeah,
Is that something also that an individual contributor can work on? Is that another piece of the skill set that an individual contributor can work on as an individual contributor?
absolutely.
Um, so
Absolutely.
yeah, what
I
some examples
actually
there?
highly recommend even entry level people, junior people just getting into the industry to start training your eye to look for those type of problems.
Mm.
So recognizing what is a management level problem. That can come in many ways. It's through like a training to like I can teach you like how to spot one, right? Like some of the stuff we went through, or you just audit what the people at the manager level are thinking about, how they spending their time, what keeps them up at night, and then tracing that back to a list of problems that they care about and they need to work on. So once you've identified the problem, you decide if it's for you or not, and if you want to double down and get good at it, then you just lean into the problem and think about what are ways you can contribute to the solution.
Mhm.
So the earlier on you start solving that problem, then like you naturally develop more reps.
Mhm.
And like once you're at that level and you're required and expected to solve that problem, then you've had exposure to those problems and you've been thinking about it for years.
Mhm.
So that transition is way more easy than waiting for the organization to expect you to solve it. And it's the first time you're encountering this new game, right?
Mhm. Taking the initiative to learn. Yeah.
Yeah. And in my career, I always liked those problems a lot. So when I was in IC, even when I moved from business to tech, I didn't stay in IC very long
Mhm.
because people will recognize that you're very good at solving those problems or contributing towards those solutions. So they'll naturally start to put you in that role, especially when they see you make a huge impact solving those type of problems
Mhm.
versus working on the code yourself.
Gotcha.
So I was in IC for less than 2 years because I would also like deliver something and I think about, okay, how do I make it better for the next person in this workflow to deliver it?
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
just like zoom out and just like fix the process. Um, just like ask for forgiveness rather than permission. Usually like, oh, it's so much better, right? When you're involved and you're doing things, then they'll just keep throwing those problems at you.
Mhm.
Um, because there's a huge amount of these problems at the senior leadership ranks, middle management, and everything. They're actually looking for more people to take the heat off them. So
Mhm.
there's no
Yeah.
reason why they don't give you shots on goal and just like take something off their plate,
Mhm.
especially if you're good at solving them. So
And I get part of the skill there is solving them and bringing solutions in a way that is not disruptive to existing process, that has, escape hatches and, safety margins to where, you trial it in a way
yeah,
that if it doesn't work, it's not destructive. The database doesn't go
yeah, it
down
comes
or.
down to the part after recognizing the opportunity, making the good decision. So it's the probabilistic thinking.
Mhm.
And if it's like a two-way door, then like you could take like more aggressive shots on goal, right? And
Mhm.
you can always revert back. And you lay out those probabilities ahead of time to your leadership.
Mhm.
So you could say, okay, there's like a 20% chance of like this happening, but 80% of the time it's gonna like be this based
Mhm.
on these assumptions. So when
Mhm.
things do go wrong, as long as your assumptions were made and they're like they caught it, it's just the information changed, so we need to update our assumptions.
Mhm.
uh, so yeah, a lot of new managers, they're afraid to rock the boat, so to speak,
Mhm.
because they feel like if I make a wrong decision, then it's I'm going to disrupt the process, right? And then I'm going to have to like clean it up after and so forth. And there's like depending on the culture, there might be like a cycle of blame that
Mhm.
happens
Right.
after. But the thing is, it's foreseeing those not black swan events, but like just adverse events that could happen
Mhm.
and flagging that ahead of time, assigning a probability to it, and say like under these assumptions, we continue on the happy path. But if these assumptions break as we find out more, then like it might not happen, and you need to go update your probabilities basically.
Mhm.
So it becomes a very systematic exercise, and it's like
Yeah.
detaching the personal emotional side.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There still are the personal, the best guesses and the, personal inclinations to put probabilities on things, but it still is
It's hard. It's very
reducible.
hard at the
But
beginning, but it's like forcing yourself to not think in binary terms, whether
Mhm.
it's 100 or zero. Even if it's you're 20% sure of something, that's
Mhm.
a narrower range than 0 to 100. Like
Right.
20 to 80 is much better than 0 to 100, but I see a lot of new managers hesitant to even narrow the range unless they're like dead certain. They like if it's an 80 to 20 percent range versus a 0 to 100, they sometimes default to rather not saying anything
Mm.
because they feel like it's still a big range and that's no value add. But if you think in probabilistic terms, you've
Mhm.
just shaved off 20% on the lower end of the distribution and 20% on the upper end. That's 40% of the variance.
Right, right, right. And so that's a
Yeah.
key point of realization for someone contemplating this. And you've said this before, but this is kind of like a practical, specific mode of thinking example is like that reduction coming in coming into the probabilistic business management level thinking, it's like, well, that what difference does that make? But coming into an environment where everything is assessed that way, that it is significant, and it should be brought up and included in the deliberation of the
It's a
team at
huge
large.
cultural shift. And
Hmm.
a lot of people, when they first hear it, they have a lot of trouble adopting the mindset because it's not natural to do. It's usually
Hmm.
we like to think in like go or no go terms, right? It's usually binary.
Yeah.
Um, but I usually ground them in an exercise where they do like an estimation for a project.
Hmm.
That's usually the tactical like first stepping stone. They need to implement this idea to take it from abstract to practical.
Hmm.
And once you do it for a project, which is like a nice canned use case,
Hmm.
then you'll start to apply it in more and more places.
And then you have that muscle and can start applying it to the less well boxed in situations
Yeah,
that need.
you see it
Yeah.
working.
Yeah.
Because I think they'll nod their head, say yes, that makes sense in theory, but it's
Yeah.
still a huge step to take it into practice. So the example I give my students or my clients is think about a project that went off the rails, and you have to have that difficult conversation to ask for more time and more money, and how
Hmm.
painful that meeting is. But what if you safeguarded yourself with assumptions up front and you flagged all the risks?
Hmm.
And it's rather than saying somebody messed up or whatever, it's just we know more now, and assumption number 3, 4, and 6 now no longer hold in light of this new information.
Hmm.
So
Or like
let's
if
recalibrate and rebaseline. Yeah.
right,
Like,
I'm imagining like the just you're walking a path, and the path has different splits and forks in the terrain, and you don't know what's over that next hill, and so then you discover, oh no, we do have to take this longer path around because the gigantic boulder got in our way. That
yeah, yeah.
we
Or,
yeah.
yeah, or just very bad naturally as human beings to update our predictions,
Mm,
especially when we've already sunk our soul into delivering the project. That it's like if I were to re-estimate today, what would the project timeline look like? And I think it should just be built into the culture that if you have new material information, you should
mhm.
be okay with just throwing out the old assumptions and then just like recalibrating. Yeah.
Kind of like the statistics, the intro statistics question. If you roll a die 9 times and get 9 6s in a row, what's the probability of getting that another 6? And you can argue it all sorts of different ways, but yeah, the
Yep.
math doesn't change. But there's still a psychology of that history that affects how we think about the future.
Yeah, it's very unnatural for us to update our priors. But
Yeah,
yeah, start with projects. I think that's like a very ripe use case.
very cool.
Yeah.
So we're coming near the end of the hour. I do have one other question that I would be interested to ask. But before I do, is there anything else, Casey, that you want to
No, like
fit in the
if
time?
there's questions from the audience, I'll love to take a few, but yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. So please drop those, drop any in if you have them. Communication, in the meantime, is what I'd like to bring up. Um, how, in terms of challenges in communication, what if you can't get the answers? Again, this is all part of the uncertainty and whatnot. What if, but it's a bit different. What if you are having trouble, being in regular touch with the leaders above you? What if you are having, there's an ambiguity of vision that makes it difficult for you
Mm.
to translate, what direction do we need to go to the team or teams that you're leading? Um, what are some strategies for evaluating that and working within it?
Yeah, the main strategy is to shorten the feedback loop.
Mm.
And then now it's like tactics to do that, right? So if it's an unclear or vague vision, then you meet them with a concrete example and go back with them to say, does this align with what you expected?
Mm.
Then you go through a feedback loop once, right? And they may point out certain things. It's like, okay, I didn't like this, I like this, I like this. So then you update your picture of what the vision looks like, and then you go back with example 2. So you keep going through that until you have a degree of confidence that's high enough for you to just move forward and deploy that decision or like that action down to the rest of the org.
Mhm.
um, so yeah, it's just really shortening the feedback loop through putting something on the board as a concrete example. So that's the one tip I would give if I can only give one tip, which is avoid the blank page syndrome.
Hmm.
Always put something there for people to react to.
Hmm.
Human nature it's much more easy to critique something and give feedback to something when they see it, rather than stare at a blank page and say like, what would this look like?
Hmm.
So you shortcut the work for them by putting what you think is the best plan and then getting their feedback and then updating that plan. Yeah.
Let them say, no, I don't like that. Yes, I do like this.
Yep. And mentally preparing yourself to take the feedback when they don't like something.
Hmm. Indeed.
Yeah.
So, question from the audience: how can you tell when a leadership team has no specific interest in developing and promoting leaders, apart from a situation where the leadership team thinks you're not good enough as a leader or not ready for more leadership responsibility? So, where the stakeholders over you are either not interested in that direction of growth, or if they're evaluating you directly as not ready for that growth.
Mm, I would look at it as just like from their perspective, what do they care about? How are they incentivized and rewarded? And do they see you as a contributor towards furthering what they want done?
Hmm.
Um, so it's rarely the case where they're just not interested in getting more help to solve those problems. It's usually a one of two things. One is, how aligned are you to solving the problems they want solved or they think they have? And sometimes it's okay to say, it's like, okay, maybe there's a problem you didn't know you had. So that goes back to the demand creation part, right? Which a
Mm-hmm.
lot of part where consultants come in, they'll say, hey, did you know that there's this thing that if you solve it, it could solve like a lot of your other problems? They're like, oh, I didn't think of that, right? So
Hmm.
that alignment to their objective function of like where they want to get to. And then the second part is like, how much contribution do you provide? So that would be more on the second part. If you're interested in solving problems that they have, but they're not happy with how much contribution you bring to the table, then it's like you're not good enough. You need to like do better and improve. So I like tackle it in two parts.
Okay.
Well, no, you could be like a genius, but if you're solving problems that they don't perceive to care about or that are not
Hmm.
aligned, then they don't see value in that, right? But they have nothing to do with your problem solving skills.
Hmm.
Yeah,
It's a marketing problem. It's a
it is.
marketing
Yeah,
challenge.
it's just the supply demand. Everything. I think everything comes down to supply demand. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. Any last words before we close? How do people find you? How can they engage expanded skills?
Uh yeah, so like websites launching soon, expandedskills.com. Very active on LinkedIn, also Twitter, launching newsletter very soon as well. So yeah, feel free to drop me a DM.
Cool. Yeah, and I'll for the in the video we'll have Kate, those sites and profiles linked, so be easy to find there. Great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Casey. That's all for today's event. We really appreciate the attendees and the questions. Casey, really appreciate your time and your insights. As I noted at the outset, we are recording the event, and that video will go up on our YouTube channel. Excuse me. As soon as it's ready, subscribe there to get notified when it's posted. Please do check out openteams.com to learn more about us and our offerings, and we hope to see you at a future event. Thank you very much.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Brian.